Hi, hello guys! Congratulations and thank you for joining CKDrama. This time, we'll be reviewing a Wuxia drama from China. It was released quite a while ago in 2006. Please watch the full film first, guys, to better enjoy this CKDrama summary. The film, titled The Banquet, stars the beautiful Zhang Ziyi, and who doesn't know actor Daniel Wu? You definitely do, right? This film tells the love story of a crown prince named Prince Wulan and a little girl named Wan. They grew up together, and their love blossomed. But who would have thought their relationship would ultimately be torn apart, as Princess Wan was eventually married by the king, or the prince's father himself. Heartbroken, Prince Wulan eventually left the palace and went to a remote location, leading an arts and dance studio there. How does their love story unfold? Let's take a look at the film's summary. The story begins with an arts performance where Prince Wulan has secluded himself. For 3 years, the prince has lived and led the art studio in that remote location, within a bamboo forest. Suddenly, several royal envoys, specifically envoys from the queen, arrive, secretly requesting the prince to return home and ascend the throne. The king has died, and the king's younger brother is attempting to assassinate the prince and seize the throne and the queen. Sure enough, the dance studio is soon attacked by a group of the king's soldiers, resulting in a battle between the king's and the queen's envoys. Meanwhile, the situation in the palace shows the Empress Dowager, no longer a widow, having been usurped and become the new queen consort of the king, who is, in fact, her own brother-in-law. In this scene, the queen's reluctance to accept the man she never expected to become her husband is still apparent. However, in order to fulfill her heart's desire, she finally agrees to become queen consort, willing to pretend to be kind for the prince's safety. Therefore, she very carefully seduces the king and asks for his safety. The king agrees. The scene continues with the situation at the art school, where the battle becomes increasingly unequal. The queen's soldiers are ultimately unable to defeat the king's soldiers, resulting in the death of all the dancers. Fortunately, Prince Wulan survives by hiding in the water, which has become the territory of his friends at the school. It turns out the king's promise to save Prince Wulan was just a figment of the imagination. Back at the palace, Lady of the King is seen running to meet the queen. Both women are deeply in love with Prince Wulan, and now they await his return, unaware of what has happened to the prince. While the king was still alive, this Lady Queen was indeed betrothed to Prince Wulan. Now that the king has died, things are certainly different, right? The Lady Queen, who was completely enamored with the prince, has made the queen dislike her. Remembering that Prince Wu Luan was the true love of the queen's life. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to the king, Prince Wu Luan, whose heart was grieving because of the death of Handa's father, silently entered the king, secretly entered the palace. Coincidentally, he witnessed a scene that hurt his heart, where his lover was hanging out with his uncle. As a result, the prince's suspicions regarding his father's death became even stronger. The prince was still in the palace. He observed the queen he loved until the time the prince left the palace and learned about his father's death through the lady of the king, who informed him that the king had died from being bitten by the king's scorpion. And the Empress Dowager would be crowned empress by her own uncle, who was now the new king. Then the prince cautiously met the queen and was greeted with longing and passion from the woman. But the prince's cold and even sarcastic attitude disappointed and angered the queen. Because love is the language of the heart, it seems they still trust each other,
Even though they are no longer capable of doing more, it's better to practice swordsmanship to avoid any ambiguity. But unfortunately, their meeting was discovered by the king, who had been eavesdropping on their conversation. The raging king was disappointed when he heard the queen offer the throne to the prince, even though Prince Wu Luan refused. The scene continues with the fate of the king's soldiers, who were deemed to have failed in killing the prince. They were forced to commit suicide on their horses, turning the river under the bridge blood red. Next, the king and his followers are seen, preparing for the coronation ceremony. Not long after, the queen arrived and was greeted with respect from them, but among them, only Governor Pei Hong, who was very close to the late king, gave a different respect to the queen, namely by calling her the Empress Dowager.
The king was offended to the point of silence. The king then asserted that the queen's position as Empress Dowager meant he must submit to and respect the Empress Dowager. But in this case, he was the king, and that was clearly impossible. The king's statement was unfortunately echoed by the queen, who declared herself his wife or consort. Governor Pei Hong, sensing this irregularity, suffered a disastrous fate. Besides losing his position, Pei Hong and his entire clan were sentenced to death by a marathon of beatings. Meanwhile, at his residence, Yin's son, now appointed as governor in place of Pei Hong, was venting his anger. However, his father advised him to remain patient. Despite the frequent insults, they had benefited from the positions they had achieved thus far. The father then asked General Yin's son to focus on his younger sister, the lady of the king, who was increasingly experiencing a high level of infatuation. The father advised his daughter not to see the prince anymore, but the king chose to wait for her. The scene continues in the palace, where the king is increasingly infatuated with the empress's beauty. However, he harbors a plan to kill Prince Wu Lan again. Therefore, during the coronation rehearsal, he requests that the prince practice with a fake sword against the palace soldiers. Prince Wu Lan complies with the king's command, and the training takes place. But in the midst of the battle, several palace soldiers swapped fake swords for real ones. The prince's sword broke. Seeing the prince's predicament, the queen didn't remain silent. She fought the palace soldiers until the unfair fight ended, much to the queen's anger and the king's disappointment. Afterward, the queen visited the prince. She strengthened his heart and asked him to be more confident and not have to hide behind his artistic mask. After the queen left, the prince found clues about his father's death, and his suspicions grew when he managed to discover the source of the poison. At Prince Wu Lan's residence, the lady of the king appeared, always faithfully accompanying him with her sincere love. The prince, who was filled with turmoil, became very sensitive and initially thought the king was only pitying him and using him. Somehow, the gluten room happened, and it turned out that the lady of the king was indeed able to fill the emptiness in the prince's heart. Now we arrive at the queen's coronation. The event was held with great luxury and was presented with great fanfare, featuring various performances. Even Prince Wu Lan participated in it, providing entertainment in the form of dancing. But guys, the dance the prince presented actually touched the king's heart. The dance was about a king who died from poison. It was very similar to what the late king experienced. Seeing the king's expression, the prince harbored even more resentment. Although furious, the king tried to keep it to himself so as not to arouse the guests' suspicions. Then, the king pretended to praise his nephew's performance. But who would have thought? Behind the praise, the king once again intended to kill Prince Wu Lan by sending him in exchange for an ambassador to Catan. The queen attempted to stop her husband's policy, but to no avail. Amidst the tension, the lady of the king arrived and offered to accompany the prince on his journey. The father and brother were both worried and irritated by the actions of this woman, and the queen was especially enraged by the impudence of this lady-in-waiting. Although the prince intervened, the queen's decision to whip the lady of the king was unwavering. At her residence, the father was seen mourning the grief of his only daughter. The girl was in unbearable pain. Soon, they were again distracted by the arrival of the queen. And unfortunately, the king once again misbehaved and offended the queen. Instead of admitting illness, he accused her of jealousy. The queen, already troubled and sensitive, punished him again by giving him a sign. And the saddest are obviously his parents, right? The scene continues, and we see the fate of the prince, who has once again been deceived by the king. Instead of heading to Catan, the prince finds the route strange. Just as the prince is about to be killed, Governor In's son, the older brother of the lady of the king, suddenly appears. Naturally, in that battle, the king's envoys are soundly defeated by Governor In's son's attack, whose fighting skills are extremely high and capable. From a conversation with Governor In, it is learned that the queen sent them. Most importantly, Governor In's beloved younger brother is under her control. Another reason is because Prince Wulan is the lifeblood of his beloved younger brother. Upon arriving at the palace, Governor In and his father appear before the king and inform him of the death of the prince and his troops due to their involvement in the war with the Catan people. Governor In then pretends to admit to having fought and destroyed the Catan people. The king is greatly relieved, especially upon hearing of the prince's death. The king, finding the masks strange and disliking them, gave them to them. He then planned to hold a royal banquet tomorrow at midnight. Although the palace servants had warned him that tomorrow would not be a good day, the king refused to believe them and went ahead with the decision, even threatening death to any officials who failed to attend. As the banquet approached, the queen, working with Governor Yin, was seen searching for the deadliest poison to kill the king. The cruel woman even offered the poison seller a death sentence. At the governor's residence, the father and sister finally agreed to keep the prince's life a secret. Although they couldn't bear to see their younger sister, who had lost her appetite, the girl still seemed happy and faithfully waited for the prince. Her brother, who loved her dearly, promised to always look after her. Let's move on to the palace, where the queen's strange behavior unfolds. The king, who loved her so much, made her cry, but that didn't deter the queen from killing her. The queen's recklessness became a topic of discussion for the ministers and Governor Yin. Although the queen appeared to be cooperating with them, they still felt anxious and unsafe. Then they agreed to overthrow the queen as a rebel and murderer of the king. Not only that, the father also planned to crown his son, Governor Yin, as king. Wow, 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 wow. Then the father and son immediately prepared their swords, which they had previously poisoned. Even more cunning, the queen prepared the poison for the king. With a satisfied smile, she successfully persuaded the king to arrest and punish the minister and Governor Yin after the banquet. And here the film's climax arrives, at the royal banquet. The feast was sumptuous and fiery. If you're curious, make sure to watch the full film. After the royal banquet, which included various artistic performances, we immediately observed the queen's preparations as she skillfully placed poison from her nails into the king's drink. Her actions were clearly observed by the minister and Governor Yin. After confirming her mission, the queen offered the drink to the king, whispering a deadly seduction in his ear. The king was delighted, but just as he was about to drink it, the king's lady-in-waiting suddenly caused him yet another distress, disrupting the plans of the figures, who had different interests and different strategies, but were all in the same meeting.
The lady-in-waiting wanted to perform a special dance in memory of the prince, leaving the king deeply moved. Even more shocking, the king was so moved that he offered the poisoned drink he was holding to the lady-in-waiting. Her beloved father and brother were understandably anxious. The queen tried to dissuade her by offering another cup, but the king remained firm, and the girl drank it, unaware of the consequences. The girl then donned her mask and began her dance, unaware that Prince Wu Luan was among the dancers. Throughout the dance and song, the king's lady could be heard moaning as she struggled to resist the poison she had just discovered, until she finally collapsed at the end of the dance. When she realized she had fallen into the prince's arms, the king's lady was overjoyed. In her dying state, she expressed her feelings and faith to the prince, who had been crying while embracing her. Finally, the girl died, leaving behind the grief of her father, her brother, and even the prince. This shocking tragedy suddenly turned into incredible tension, especially for the king. It was then that the king realized that the poison was actually intended for him. He never imagined that the queen he loved, trusted, and even revered so much would betray him. So he repeatedly asked the queen if she wanted him dead. Firmly and hoarsely, the queen admitted it.
The king then requested a funeral with high honors for the lady of the king, as the queen made clear. The father, who had been holding back his grief and anger, shouted and cursed the queen. Suddenly, Prince Wu Luan ran and flew toward the king, intending to kill him with the dagger in his hand. But things didn't go as smoothly as expected, as the royal troops had clearly already responded swiftly. The battle didn't last long, but the prince, with his charm, managed to stop them from attacking. The king finally dismounted and spoke with the prince. But this time, the king had become a different person. No matter how many times the king tried to kill him, the heavens always saved the prince. The king, feeling unwanted, especially by his beloved queen, finally complied with their wishes. The poison, which the lady of the king hadn't yet consumed, was finally consumed by the king. The king died in the arms of the queen, unable to contain her grief. After the king's death, the queen asked the prince to ascend the throne, but unfortunately the prince always refused. Please give your opinion on the initial impact of the prince's refusal. Continuing, Governor Yin, resentful of the queen for causing his sister's death, suddenly swung a poisoned knife at the queen, but the prince caught the knife. Governor Yin tried to yell at the prince that the knife was poisoned. His screams were cut off when the queen retaliated with a stab to the neck, which ultimately knocked the governor out. And here comes the peak of the queen's panic and grief. When she learned that her beloved had disappeared and died of poison, no healers, shamans, or doctors came. The prince was indeed destined to die, and at that moment, Empress Wan was truly crowned queen. Meanwhile, Minister Yin was accused of rebellion and ultimately exiled. Now we arrive at the final scene in the lonely queen's life. Although sad, she expresses her relief at no longer having to live at the hands of a man she never loved. Now she should be proud to be the sole ruler. Shortly afterward, a sword slid from her grasp and struck the queen in the chest. She then looked up and pointed at someone she seemed to recognize, who then killed her. And that someone remains a mystery to me. So if anyone has an answer, please leave a comment in the comments section. And finally, that concludes our summary of this film, with its surprising ending. Okay guys, thanks for watching the video. If you still want to watch our videos, please click on our other film collections on your screen. Don't hesitate to request your own. Write them in the comments section. We hope our presentation entertains, uplifts, and inspires you wherever you are. Please forgive any shortcomings in our presentation and delivery.
And don't forget to continue supporting us by clicking the like, share, comment, and subscribe buttons so that we can improve our presentation and educate our young ladies at home. Finally, we'd like to say goodbye. See you next time. Thank you and goodbye.